The wooden gavel hovered above the sounding block, suspended only inches away from stripping a mother of everything she had left. Donovan Prescott had already secured his victory. But before that final, devastating blow could echo through courtroom 302, a sealed envelope was placed on the judge's desk. It contained a dead man's confession, and it was about to destroy everything Donovan had built. Cook County Circuit Court, room 302. Smelled of stale coffee, lemon furniture polish, and the unmistakable metallic scent of ruined lives. The long marriage between Donovan and Camille Prescott was only one strike of the gavel away from being legally erased. Camille sat rigidly at the petitioner's table, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned completely white. She looked far older than she truly was. The relentless machinery of the Illinois family court system had slowly worn away the natural warmth in her face, leaving behind a hollow-eyed shadow of the woman she had once been. Beside her sat her attorney, Mallory Keene, an experienced litigator who wore the grim expression of a surgeon who had just lost a patient on the operating table. Across the aisle, Donovan Prescott looked as though he were attending a business meeting whose outcome had already been decided. Dressed in a custom charcoal Brioni suit, he leaned comfortably back in his chair. Occasionally, he bent toward his powerful, aggressive attorney, Blaine Wexler, and whispered something under his breath. Whenever Donovan looked at Camille, the corner of his mouth lifted into a tiny, chilling smile. It was the expression of a man who did not merely want to win, he wanted to obliterate her. And until that moment, he had succeeded. The Honorable Edmund Carver, a silver-haired judge with decades of experience on the bench, sat above them, adjusting his reading glasses while reviewing the final dissolution decree. Judge Carver was a practical man who had grown exhausted by the endless conflicts of Chicago's wealthiest couples. He wanted to finish the case and move on to the next one. "Let the record reflect," Judge Carver announced, his deep voice slightly muffled by the heavy oak paneling, "that both parties have reviewed the final judgment. The prenuptial agreement remains fully enforceable." Camille closed her eyes and fought against a sudden wave of nausea. The prenuptial agreement had been presented to her as nothing more than a formality. That was what Donovan had told her while they stood together on a beach in Maui. "It's only to protect the family trust, sweetheart," he had said. But hidden deep within the pages of dense legal language was a vicious morality clause. During the divorce proceedings, a manila envelope had arrived at Donovan's office. Inside were high-resolution photographs showing Camille stumbling into a room at the Drake Hotel, supported by a broad-shouldered man whose face remained hidden. Camille had sworn to Mallory, to the judge, and to anyone willing to listen that she had been drugged. She had received a desperate message from her younger sister's phone, begging her to come to the hotel immediately. When Camille arrived, a man in the lobby bumped into her. He handed her a bottle of water, which she drank without thinking. After that, her memory became a terrifying collection of broken images and darkness. She woke up alone and fully dressed, but the damage had already been done. The photographs looked undeniable. The hotel's security footage had conveniently become corrupted. In the eyes of the law, Camille was an unfaithful wife. The morality clause had been triggered. "Under the terms of the agreement," Judge Carver continued, reading from the thick stack of papers before him, "Mr. Prescott will retain sole ownership of the primary residence in Winnetka, the commercial real estate portfolio managed through Prescott Holdings, and the entirety of his offshore investment accounts." Blaine Wexler removed the cap from his Mont Blanc pen, preparing to sign the final documents. "Mrs. Prescott," the judge continued, his voice softening only slightly, "will receive a one-time payment of $250,000, a monthly stipend for a limited period, and the Volvo station wagon. $250,000 from an estate valued at nearly $42 million. It was not a settlement. It was financial execution. But even that was not the worst part. Because of the alleged affair and a fabricated psychological evaluation that Donovan had paid heavily to obtain, he had been awarded primary physical custody of their young twin daughters, Piper and Wren. Camille would be allowed only limited visitation. "Are there any final objections before I sign this order?" Judge Carver asked, looking over the rim of his glasses. Mallory Keene gently placed her hand on Camille's arm. "We have nothing further, Your Honor," she said, her voice strained. There was nothing left to argue. They had exhausted every motion, every legal challenge, and every favor available to them. Donovan's legal team had buried them beneath endless paperwork while slowly draining Camille of the money she needed to continue fighting. Judge Carver nodded. He picked up his pen. Then he reached for the wooden gavel. "Very well, by the authority granted to me by the state of Illinois, I hereby declare this marriage done." Wait! The word was not shouted. Yet it tore through the suffocating silence of courtroom 302 like a gunshot. Every head turned. The heavy double doors at the rear of the courtroom had swung open. Standing in the doorway was an elderly woman dressed in a sharp black morning suit. She leaned heavily on a silver-handled cane. Her name was Helena Whitmore. Donovan's relaxed posture disappeared instantly. He sat upright so quickly that his chair groaned beneath him. The healthy flush of victory drained from his face. Helena was the widow of Gideon Whitmore. Gideon had served as Donovan's chief financial officer, business partner, and closest confidant for many years. Before the divorce proceedings began, Gideon's Porsche had veered off a winding road during a heavy rainstorm and crashed into a ravine. The police ruled his death a tragic accident. "Ma'am, this is a closed proceeding," Bailiff Ortega said as he stepped forward, one hand resting near his utility belt. "You cannot enter." Helena ignored him. She walked slowly down the center aisle. The rhythmic thud and click of her cane against the marble floor echoed through the courtroom. In her hand was a thick, oversized envelope sealed with dark red wax. "My husband left strict instructions," Helena said. Her voice trembled, but beneath that weakness was a deep and bitter anger. She did not look at Donovan, even though he stared at her with wide, terrified eyes. Her gaze remained fixed on Judge Carver. "He told me that if anything happened to him, I was to place this envelope in a safe deposit box." She lifted it slightly. "He instructed me to deliver it directly into the hands of the judge presiding over Donovan Prescott's divorce when Donovan believed he had finally won." Blaine Wexler shot to his feet and slammed his palm against the table. "Objection, Your Honor! This is highly irregular. These proceedings are closed, discovery has concluded, and this woman has no legal standing in this court." "Be quiet, Mr. Wexler," Judge Carver snapped. His eyes narrowed as he studied the grieving widow. "Mrs. Whitmore, I am deeply sorry for your loss. However, your husband's personal grievances may have no relevance to this dissolution proceeding." "It is not a grievance, Your Honor," Helena said. She stopped in front of the wooden gate separating the public gallery from the main courtroom. She handed the envelope to Bailiff Ortega. "It is a confession." Camille's breath caught in her throat. Mallory's hand tightened around her shoulder, silently ordering her not to move. "Gideon told me that Donovan would try to destroy Camille," Helena continued. "He said this envelope contained proof of exactly how he planned to do it." "Your Honor, I demand that the envelope be confiscated and sealed," Wexler barked, his voice climbing with panic. He leaned toward Donovan and whispered furiously into his ear. But Donovan seemed unable to respond. His eyes remained locked on the thick, wax-sealed package now resting in the judge's hands. Judge Carver examined the front of the envelope. Written across it in Gideon Whitmore's unmistakable block lettering were the words, "To the presiding judge. Open only when Donovan Prescott believes he has won." "Mr. Wexler," Judge Carver said slowly, his voice becoming dangerously quiet, "I have witnessed nearly every form of deception imaginable in this courtroom." He stared at the envelope. "But I have never had a dead man deliver evidence to my bench." He reached for a silver letter opener. "I am going to open this envelope. If its contents are irrelevant, I will strike them from the record and consider holding Mrs. Whitmore in contempt." The tearing of the thick paper sounded impossibly loud. Inside was a stack of documents, a silver USB drive, and a handwritten letter on heavy cream-colored stationery. Judge Carver unfolded the letter. The entire courtroom seemed to stop breathing. The only sound came from the quiet ticking of the wall clock. The judge read silently. As his eyes moved across the pages, his expression began to change. The tired, practical magistrate disappeared. In his place was a man staring at something truly vile. A dark flush rose slowly along his neck. His jaw tightened until the muscles beneath his skin visibly jumped. He lowered the letter. I did not look at the attorneys. He looked directly at Donovan Prescott. "Mr. Bray." "Mr. Prescott, bye. Judge Carver whispered. The softness of his voice was more frightening than a shout. Donovan swallowed hard. A bead of sweat slid slowly down his temple. "Your Honor, whatever Gideon wrote, he was not well near the end. He became paranoid. He had a substance problem that we kept private." "Are you familiar with a man named Victor Halden?" Judge Carver interrupted. Blaine Wexler froze. Camille drew in a sharp breath. She had never heard that name before. I don't know," Donovan stammered. "According to your late business partner," Judge Carver continued, lifting another document from the stack, "Victor Halden is a disgraced former private investigator. He studied the financial records in his hand. And according to this ledger, which appears to contain routing information connected to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands that you failed to disclose in your sworn financial statements, you paid Mr. Hoster Halden $75,000. "Objection! Hearsay!" Wexler shouted, his entire body trembling with alarm. "An unverified letter written by a deceased man cannot be admitted as evidence. It can when it is accompanied by the original unedited security footage from the Drake Hotel," Judge Carver thundered. He slammed one hand onto the bench. Then he held up the small silver USB drive. "Mr. Whitmore states that he recovered the original recording from your office safe, Mr. Prescott." Donovan's lips parted, but no sound emerged. "He further states that the video clearly shows Mr. Halden placing a sedative inside your wife's water bottle before carrying her toward the hotel elevators." A sound escaped Camille that was half sob and half scream. She covered her mouth with both hands as tears spilled down her face. "I wasn't crazy," she whispered. Her voice broke. "I wasn't crazy. Furthermore," Judge Carver continued, his voice rolling through the courtroom like thunder, "Mr. Whitmore's confession describes a systematic conspiracy in which you transferred more than $28 million in marital assets into shell corporations disguised as failed investments. He raised another document. Investments you intentionally destroyed so those assets would not be divided during the divorce. Shock spread through the courtroom. Your Honor, Mallory Keene said as she rose. Her voice trembled, but her eyes had become lethal. If these allegations are accurate, Mr. Prescott has not merely committed perjury and fraud upon this court. She looked directly at Donovan. He arranged a criminal assault against my client. Donovan leaped to his feet and pointed a shaking finger at Camille. It is a forgery! Gideon hated me! Camille arranged this. She paid Helena to come here and lie. Bailiff! Judge Carver interrupted, his voice stripped of all mercy. Lock the doors, no one leaves this courtroom. He picked up the same gavel that had been moments away from destroying Camille's life. Mr. Wexler, the judge said coldly, I strongly recommend that you advise your client to invoke his Fifth Amendment rights immediately. Donovan stared at him in disbelief. I will not be finalizing this divorce today. Judge Carver's gaze hardened. I will, however, be contacting the district attorney. The heavy click of the deadbolt sliding into place reverberated through courtroom 302. Bailiff Ortega stood with his back against the mahogany doors, one hand resting firmly on the grip of his service weapon. The meaning was unmistakable. The sanctity of the court had been violently violated, and nobody was leaving until the truth had been fully exposed. Donovan Prescott had spent his entire adult life controlling every room he entered. Now he looked like a trapped and terrified animal. His custom Briony suit seemed to hang loosely from his rigid body. He tugged desperately at his silk tie as his breathing became shallow and erratic. Judge Carver, I must insist, Blaine Wexler began. His voice no longer carried its usual aggressive authority. This is an ambush. My client's constitutional rights are being violated because of an unverified accusation written by a dead man. We demand an immediate recess so we can evaluate these claims. Request denied, Mr. Wexler, Judge Carver replied. His voice was cold enough to freeze the room. I did not even look at the attorney. His furious eyes remained fixed on the silver USB drive lying on his desk. If this device contains what Gideon Whitmore claims, your client has done far more than commit perjury. The judge leaned forward. He orchestrated a premeditated assault, defrauded this court, and used the judicial system as a weapon to continue abusing his wife. Judge Carver gestured sharply toward the court clerk. Bring me your laptop. Connect it to the primary courtroom monitors. Camille remained completely still. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a captive bird fighting to escape. Mallory wrapped a fiercely protective arm around her trembling shoulders. Throughout the divorce proceedings, Camille had been branded a reckless adulteress, an unfit mother, and a selfish woman who had destroyed her family during a drug-fueled encounter in a hotel room. She had lost her daughters. She had lost her home. She had lost her dignity in the eyes of nearly everyone around her. The possibility that the truth might finally be revealed was so overwhelming that she could barely breathe. Helena Whitmore remained beside the gallery gate, leaning heavily on her silver-handled cane. Warm tears streamed silently down her deeply lined cheeks, but her eyes burned with unwavering, righteous anger. She had come to complete her late husband's final act of redemption. The clerk connected the laptop to the large flat-screen monitors mounted along the paneled courtroom walls. Those screens were normally used to display complicated financial charts. Judge Carver inserted the flash drive. The room fell silent as the file directory appeared. There was only one video. Its title was simple, Drake Original.mp4. Judge Carver opened the file. The screen flickered. High-definition black-and-white security footage from the Drake Hotel lobby filled the monitors. The luxurious lobby was nearly deserted except for a few guests and the exhausted night concierge. Then Camille appeared. She looked frantic. She clutched her glowing phone tightly in one hand, her eyes searching the room as though she expected to find someone in immediate danger. She was clearly responding to the fabricated message sent from her sister's phone. Oh God, Camille whispered. She buried her face against Mallory's shoulder. She could not bear to watch the moment her life had been stolen. On the screen, a broad-shouldered man entered the lobby wearing a dark overcoat and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Victor Halden. He approached the concierge desk and positioned himself near the area where Camille was pacing anxiously. Camille placed her open water bottle on a small marble table while she hurriedly typed a message into her phone. In one fluid, practiced movement, Halden bumped his hip against the table. As Camille reached out to stop the bottle from falling, Halden's hand passed over the open rim. A small white capsule dropped from his fingers into the water. It disappeared instantly. Stop the video, Mallory commanded. Her voice cut through the courtroom with lethal authority. Judge Carver paused the footage. He enlarged the frozen image. The digital resolution was flawless. There was no confusion. There was no shadow. There was no reasonable doubt. The white capsule falling from Halden's fingers had been captured perfectly. Mr. Wexler, Judge Carver said in a terrifyingly quiet voice, would you care to explain why your client paid this man $75,000 from an undisclosed offshore account shortly after this footage was recorded? Wexler stared at the frozen image. Then he slowly turned toward Donovan. The color vanished completely from his face. Blaine Wexler was a ruthless civil attorney. He was known for aggressive tactics and vicious courtroom strategy. But he was not a criminal. I understood with sudden, horrifying clarity that Donovan had used him. Wexler took a deliberate step away from his client. The physical distance between the two men said more than words ever could. He began packing his leather briefcase with frantic, uncoordinated movements. "Your Honor," Wexler said, his voice visibly shaking, "I was retained only to represent Mr. Prescott in a civil dissolution of marriage." He glanced at Donovan with open disgust. "I had no knowledge of any criminal acts, secret payments, or manipulated evidence." He closed his briefcase. "Effective immediately, I am formally withdrawing as counsel for Donovan Prescott." "You cannot do that!" Donovan screamed. He lunged to his feet and grabbed Wexler by the sleeve. "You work for me. I pay you thousands of dollars an hour. Fix this." Wexler violently pulled his arm free. "I cannot fix a federal felony, Donovan." His voice shook with rage. "And I will not go to federal prison for you." "Sit down, Mr. Prescott," Bailiff Ortega bellowed. He drew his baton and stepped toward the defense table. Donovan collapsed heavily into the chair, burying his sweating face in his hands. The untouchable image he had created had shattered. He was no longer a feared titan of Chicago real estate. He was a cornered man, exposed beneath the unforgiving light of the truth. Judge Carver turned back to the stack of documents from the sealed envelope. "The video is damning enough," he said. "But Mr. Whitmore's letter goes much further." He lifted the pages. "It explains exactly how you drained the marital estate. It provides offshore routing numbers, shell corporation aliases, and the names of fabricated corporate boards." Then Judge Carver looked directly at Camille. For the first time, his expression held nothing but profound sorrow. "Mrs. Prescott, you were accused of withdrawing $50,000 from a joint account to finance an illicit lifestyle." Camille stared at him through tear-filled eyes. "According to these records, your husband stole $28 million from your daughter's trust funds and from the equity in your family home." The judge's voice grew heavier. "He created false corporate records to make the commercial real estate portfolio appear to have suffered catastrophic losses." Camille slowly raised her head. The defeated emptiness in her eyes was gone. In its place burned the fierce protective fury of a mother. "My daughters," she choked out. "He took my daughters away from me." "Not anymore," Mallory said firmly. She squeezed Camilla's hand with all her strength. "The previous custody order is immediately vacated," Judge Carver announced. The gavel crashed against the wooden block with explosive force. "Full temporary physical and legal custody of Piper and Wren Prescott is awarded to their mother, Camille Prescott." Camille gasped. "Mr. Prescott is stripped of all visitation rights pending a complete criminal investigation." Donovan made a strangled, pitiful sound. No one in the courtroom offered him even the smallest trace of sympathy. "But this is not over," the judge continued. His eyes darkened as he turned to the final page of Gideon Whitmore's handwritten letter. "There is another matter." Judge Carver stared at Donovan. "One that transforms this from a case involving financial fraud and criminal assault into something far more sinister." The silence inside courtroom 302 became suffocating. Helena closed her eyes and braced herself against her cane. She knew what was written on the final page. It was the reason she had crossed the city through the pouring rain, ignoring her declining health, determined to make sure Donovan Prescott faced the full consequences of his actions. Judge Carver adjusted his reading glasses. For the first time, his usually steady hands began to tremble. "Mr. Whitmore wrote the following," he said, reading aloud for the official record. "If you are reading this letter, Judge, then I am dead." A ripple of fear passed through the room. "I did not die from natural causes. I told Donovan that I could no longer live with the guilt of helping him destroy an innocent woman." Camille stared at the judge. "I informed him that I planned to send the original hotel security footage anonymously to Camille's attorney." The judge continued reading. "Donovan smiled at me and said that my absolute loyalty was the only thing keeping my family safe." Helena covered her mouth as tears continued down her face. "My Porsche was later taken to a private garage that Donovan insisted I use. Afterward, the brakes began to feel dangerously soft." The courtroom remained frozen. "I am writing this because I believe Donovan intends to kill me before I can testify." A collective gasp tore through the room. Mallory covered her mouth in horror. Camille turned toward Donovan. For the first time, she saw the full depth of the monster she had married. He had drugged her. He had stolen their daughters. He had robbed their family. And he may have murdered his closest friend to protect his fortune. Donovan shook his head violently, his eyes wide and frantic. "No, that is insane. He crashed because of the rain. The police said the car hydroplaned. The road was slick. Gideon drank too much. He was paranoid." "The letter continues," Judge Carver said, raising his voice above Donovan's desperate denials. "Donovan used a mechanic named Rafael Dominguez." Donovan suddenly stopped moving. "Check the service records at the private garage in the South Loop. You will discover that the brake lines were deliberately damaged." Judge Carver's expression became cold and merciless. "Donovan Prescott murdered me. Do not allow him to destroy Camille as well." The judge lowered the letter onto his desk. Then he turned toward Bailiff Ortega. "Contact the Chicago Police Department immediately." The bailiff reached for the radio attached to his shoulder. "Request Detective Marlo Shaw from Major Homicide. Tell him we have a suspect being detained in connection with the murder of Gideon Whitmore, conspiracy to commit assault, perjury, and large-scale federal financial fraud." "Yes, Your Honor," Bailiff Ortega replied. "You cannot do this," Donovan shrieked. He scrambled backward from the table. You have no real proof. A paranoid letter written by a dead man is not evidence. We have the high-definition recording, Mr. Prescott. Judge Carver replied coldly. We have the offshore routing information. He leaned forward. And I can assure you that when investigators locate Rafael Dominguez and offer him a plea agreement, your entire empire will collapse. The heavy courtroom doors eventually opened again. Uniformed Chicago police officers entered, led by a grim-faced Detective Marlowe Shaw. Steel handcuffs gleamed in his hand. Donovan Prescott, Detective Shaw announced. He seized the disgraced billionaire by the collar of his expensive suit and pulled him to his feet. You are under arrest for perjury, financial fraud, conspiracy to commit assault, and you are being detained as the primary suspect in the homicide of Gideon Whitmore. He pulled Donovan's arms behind his back. You have the right to remain silent. The handcuffs closed around Donovan's wrist with a sharp metallic click. I strongly recommend that you use it. To Camille, that sound was sweeter than anything she had ever heard. As the officers escorted the sobbing, broken Donovan past her table, he refused to look at her. His arrogance, cruelty, and power had disappeared. Everything had been destroyed by the guilty conscience of a dead man. Camille rose. Her legs trembled, but for the first time since the nightmare began, she felt truly strong. She turned toward Helena Whitmore. The elderly widow stood beside the gallery gate, quietly weeping as she leaned against her cane. Camille walked past Mallory, opened the wooden gate, and wrapped her arms around Helena. She pulled the fragile, grieving woman into a desperate and deeply grateful embrace. Thank you, Camille whispered against Helena's shoulder. Her tears flowed freely. Thank you, you gave me my life back. Her voice broke. You gave me my little girls back. Helena gently patted Camille's back with one trembling hand. Gideon loved you and those girls, she said softly. He could no longer live with the guilt. Helena pulled away and looked into Camille's eyes. Now go and bring your daughters home. The divorce was later finalized under entirely different terms. Donovan remained inside the Cook County Jail denied bail because of the severity of the charges and the possibility that he might attempt to flee. His court-appointed attorney had no leverage. Judge Edmund Carver invalidated the original prenuptial agreement, citing extreme and malicious fraud. Camille received sole ownership of the Winnetka estate. She was granted full operational control of the commercial real estate portfolio. She was also awarded the entire $28 million Donovan had hidden in offshore accounts. The court stripped Donovan of every asset necessary to compensate the woman he had abused and defrauded. But the money meant far less to Camille than what happened next. She stood on the front porch of the sprawling Winnetka home and watched as a black town car pulled into the long driveway. The rear doors flew open. Piper and Wren came running across the freshly manicured lawn, their colorful backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. "Mommy!" they screamed together. Camille dropped to her knees on the grass. Both girls ran directly into her waiting arms. She held them with all the strength she had left and buried her tear-streaked face in their hair, breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and sunshine. The nightmare was finally over. The judge had brought down his gavel, but this time it had not destroyed a family. It had begun rebuilding one that a monster had tried to tear apart. A hollow victory had been transformed into undeniable justice. If Camille's fight for justice kept you on the edge of your seat, press the like button to support stories where truth finally wins. Share this courtroom drama with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable real-life stories. What would you have done in Camille's position? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and stay with us for the next incredible twist of fate.